This is a deep dive into analysing context, and in this video we're looking at field. As a quick summary, field describes the level to which a person can access a text. The key question to ask yourself is, how accessible is this text? There's three criteria that we're going to talk through: prior knowledge, specialised language, and language complexity. All of these criteria have to do with field, and some cross over, but we're going to try and look at them individually to help you understand what a complex understanding of field looks like. When we talk about field, we're looking at the difference between something that's very accessible versus something that is inaccessible. So let's have a closer look at our criteria. When considering prior knowledge, we want to ask ourselves, what would you have to be familiar with prior to reading this text? We're going to be looking for references to events, experiences, and references to these things that may have happened in the past. For our sample text for this video, we're looking at this small piece about cell phone addiction. When I'm analysing this text, I want to be asking myself, is this referring to anything that I might have needed to know before reading this piece? Let's look at some examples. In the second sentence, it talks about the fact that the problem of cell phone addiction is identical to the problem regarding the existence of behavioural addictions as opposed to substance addictions. The assumption here is that we are familiar with that problem. It's basically saying this problem is just like that other problem. If we've read the previous problem, then this comparison makes perfect sense. If we're not aware of that problem, then we don't have the prior knowledge for this particular comparison to make sense. When we look at prior knowledge in texts, we'll often find that there's references to experiences, things that have happened before, things that you might have seen in the past, trends that are reoccurring, and that assumption is always that we have that knowledge as we come into this text. The second criteria we look at when we're considering field is specialised language, which is very similar to prior knowledge, but it's just another category of ways to think about this. Sometimes in order to access something, you need to have certain experience or qualifications in order to be familiar with it. Imagine being a mechanic and reading a technical specification manual on a particular car. Or imagine being a heart surgeon reading a surgeon's report on a particular surgery. We would assume in that case that these texts would use language that you wouldn't understand unless you were a car mechanic or a surgeon. Looking for this type of information can tell us a lot about the field of a text. If we go back to our sample text, and in this case look at specialised language, we're looking for words that build on the assumption of a professional. A couple of examples in this text include the mention of the DSM-5, which is a specialist term used by psychologists to determine mental health symptoms. Now, if you weren't a psychologist, then you wouldn't be familiar with that as a tool. So there's a prior knowledge there, but there's also an assumption that comes with holding a particular qualification. In the same way, we see a comparison early in the text, which says the existence of cell phone addiction as opposed to it being a manifestation of an impulsivity disorder. Similar to our previous slides, there's a comparison made here between addiction and impulsivity disorder, but the assumption is that we understand the implications of what this means. It means that as a specialist, we should be able to tell the difference between the symptoms of an addiction and the symptoms of an impulsivity disorder, which again would be something we would expect from a psychologist or an expert in the field, which makes it specialised language. The last category that we're looking for is called language complexity. And what we're asking ourselves here is, what kind of language does the text use, and would the average person understand it? In this case, we're looking for complex synonyms. So a synonym is another way of saying a word. So for example, I could say a word like fear, but I could also use a synonym of that word called terror. Generally, when we're looking at language complexity, we're thinking about whether the language used is unfamiliar or uncommon in any way. Here's an example in our sample text. The word used in this case is anomalous. Anomalous is connected to the word anomaly, which means something that's different. However, the word itself isn't particularly common, and if an average person was reading it who perhaps wasn't overly exposed to this type of academic language, we would say this is inaccessible. Language complexity is different to prior knowledge and specialised knowledge because in this case it's not specific to the field. This isn't about whether you're a psychologist or a mechanic. This is simply a way of speaking that is more complex than the average person might choose. Based on the text that I've analysed in this video, I would say that the field of this text is more inaccessible then it is accessible. And I was able to find 3 pieces of evidence to support my claim. As a justification for my judgment, I would say that the text assumes prior knowledge of similar case studies and comparisons between similar disorders. The text references specialized terms such as impulsivity disorder and references the result of tools such as the DSM-5, and the text uses complex synonyms that would be unfamiliar to those outside the academic field. As a final reference for this video, I draw attention to the assessment criteria when we're looking at demonstrating an understanding of context. In the A band, we need to demonstrate comprehensive analysis and draw on the language of each area of field. Hopefully this video has given you a picture of that language and what it means to show a comprehensive analysis as opposed to just identifying one of the 3 examples that you've been shown in this video.